I'll never forget the way the color drained from my daughter's face when I told her I'd already signed the deed over to a commercial developer. The expensive crystal wine glass she was holding, the one she'd bought to class up my dining room, trembled so hard I thought it would shatter against her teeth. My son, David, just sat there with his mouth hanging open, a piece of prime rib halfway to his lips, looking at me like I'd just grown a second head. They had spent 3 years ignoring my existence, and the last 6 months spending $240,000 of their own money to renovate my home, all in hopes of fattening up their future inheritance. But to understand why they were currently staring at a legal document that turned their investment into smoke, I need to take you back to the beginning. I spent 42 years in industrial HVAC. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it paid well enough to build a life. I built our family home on 10 acres in the outskirts of Austin, back when the land was cheap and the air was clear. I put every joist in place, laid the hardwood floors myself, and spent my weekends digging the pond where my kids, David and Sarah, learned to fish. I provided everything: private schools, club soccer, college tuitions that I paid in cash so they wouldn't have the burden of debt. When my wife, Martha, passed away 4 years ago, I thought I'd built a foundation strong enough to hold us together. I was wrong. The first crack appeared about 6 months after the funeral. I invited David and his wife Chloe over for Sunday dinner. David was a high-level marketing executive who drove a car that cost more than my first house, yet he always seemed to be between liquid assets. He called an hour after he was supposed to arrive to say they were going to a brunch in the city instead. No apology, just a "talk soon, Dad." Then came Sarah. I'd helped her and her husband Mark with a $50,000 down payment on their home 3 years prior. When I asked if they were coming by for the holidays, Sarah told me quite coldly that they were spending it with Mark's more active side of the family. Apparently, a 68-year-old widower wasn't active enough for their Instagram feed. By the second year, the silence was deafening. I'd call and it would go to voicemail. I'd text and I'd get a thumbs up emoji 3 days later. They didn't visit on my birthday. They didn't check in during the flu season. I was a ghost in the house I'd built for them. I realized then that I wasn't their father anymore. I was just a placeholder for the assets they knew were coming their way eventually. And that's when I decided to stop being a victim of their neglect and start being the man who built a multi-million-dollar company from a single toolbox. If that was all, just a bit of coldness, I might have just rewritten the will and moved on. But then came the realization of just how much they viewed me as a bank account. I found out through a mutual friend that David had been telling people my mental faculties were starting to slip. He was laying the groundwork to contest any changes I might make to my estate. He wasn't worried about my health. He was protecting his payday. I decided it was time to play a different game. I'm a patient man. You have to be in HVAC. You don't rush a diagnostic or you'll miss the real problem. So I planted a seed. I called my sister March, who I knew couldn't keep a secret if her life depended on it. I told her I'd been feeling unsteady, that my heart was fluttering, and that I was worried I wouldn't be able to maintain the property much longer. I hinted that the house was falling into disrepair and the value was plummeting. Within 48 hours, my front door, which hadn't seen a visitor in months, was practically kicked down by my loving children.
They arrived with concern that was so thick you could have spread it on toast. David brought a bottle of expensive scotch I knew he liked, and Sarah brought a bouquet of grocery store flowers. They didn't ask how I felt. They asked how the house was holding up. They walked through the rooms, looking at the dated wallpaper and the 1990s kitchen with expressions of pure horror. Not horror for me, mind you, but horror for the resale value. "Dad," David said, leaning against my old laminate countertop, "this place is a gold mine, but it's a wreck. If you if you need to move to assisted living, we'd get pennies on the dollar for this." Sarah chimed in, her eyes scanning the ceiling for water spots. "We've talked about it, and we want to help. We're going to use our own savings to renovate the place for you. We want you to live in luxury, Dad. You deserve it." I sat there, looking like a frail old man, nodding slowly. "That's so kind of you both. But it's so expensive. Are you sure?" "It's an investment in the family, Dad," Mark, Sarah's husband, said with a smirk. He was already measuring the windows. What they didn't know was that I'd already talked to my lawyer, Miller, the week before. I knew exactly what they were doing. They figured if they spent $200,000 now, they'd add $600,000 or $700,000 to the sale price later. It was a flip, and I was just the tenant they had to tolerate until the closing date. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of dust and greed. I moved into the small guest cottage on the edge of the property, claiming the noise was too much for my condition. From my porch, I watched them pour money into my house like it was a consecrated temple. David handled the interior. He tore out my hand-laid oak floors and replaced them with white European wide-plank wood. He gutted the kitchen, installing $40,000 worth of Sub-Zero and Wolf appliances. He put in Italian marble countertops that were so cold they felt like a morgue. Sarah took over the exterior and the master suite. She put in an infinity-edge pool that looked out over the pond I'd dug. She landscaped the entire 10 acres with specimen trees and designer lighting. They weren't building a home for me. They were building a brochure for a luxury realtor. Every time they asked for my opinion, I'd just cough into a handkerchief and say, "Whatever you think is best for the value, kids. I just want you to be taken care of." David actually patted my shoulder once. "Don't worry, Dad. This house is going to be the crown jewel of the neighborhood. The inheritance value alone is skyrocketing." I just smile and go back to my cottage to call Miller. By the end of the 5th month, the total bill for their generosity had climbed to $241,000. David had taken out a bridge loan, and Sarah had dipped into her kids' college fund, convinced they'd triple their money within a year when I finally faded away. They were so certain of the payoff that they stopped pretending to care about my health altogether. They didn't even bring me dinner anymore. They just sent me photos of the new backsplash. The house was finally finished in October. It was unrecognizable. It looked like a boutique hotel, cold, expensive, and utterly devoid of the memories Martha and I had built. They decided to throw a celebratory grand reopening dinner. They invited their friends, some high-end real estate agents, and of course, me. I showed up in my best suit. I looked healthy, healthier than I had in years, actually. The color was back in my cheeks because I'd spent the last 6 months resting while they did all the heavy lifting.
The dinner was catered. David was holding court in the kitchen, showing off the smart features of the oven. Sarah was on the patio, gesturing toward the pool as if she'd designed it herself. They were already talking about the property in the past tense. When we list it, the ROI on this wing, the developer interest. That was my cue. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, standing at the head of the marble table. The room went quiet. David and Sarah looked at me with those indulgent, let the old man speak smiles. "I want to thank my children," I began, my voice steady and clear. "I was feeling quite forgotten these last 3 years, but you showed up when you heard I was unwell. You spent your own hard-earned money, $240,000 if David's spreadsheets are correct, to fix up this old place." "It was our pleasure, Dad," Sarah said, sipping a wine that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. "I know it was," I said. "And because I know how much you care about the value of this property, I have some wonderful news. You see, about 3 months ago, while you were installing that beautiful marble, I was approached by the North Hill Development Group. They've been buying up the surrounding parcels for a new luxury retirement community and a commercial hub." The smiles on their faces faltered just a fraction. "I signed the closing papers yesterday," I continued, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a folded document. "I sold the house and the 10 acres for $3.2 million, cash." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on that expensive European oak. You sold it?" David stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "But Dad, the renovations, we just put 200 grand into this, our money." "I know," I said, taking a slow sip of my water. "And it really helped the appraisal. The developer was particularly impressed with the new kitchen. It added about $500,000 to the final offer. Thank you for that." Sarah stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. "You can't do that. That's our inheritance. We have a right to that money." "Actually, you don't," I said, my voice dropping an octave. The feeble act was gone. I stood tall, the man who had run a crew of 60 for 4 decades. "You didn't call for 3 years. You didn't visit your mother's grave. You didn't check on me until you thought I was dying and my assets were at risk. You didn't renovate this house for me. You renovated it for yourselves." "Dad, listen," Mark tried to intervene, but I shut him down with a look. "I'm not finished. I didn't take the $3.2 million and put it in my checking account. I've placed every single cent of the sale into the Oak Ridge Legacy Trust. It's a locked instrument." David's eyes lit up with a spark of greed. "A trust?
Okay, so we get the payouts now? I smiled. It wasn't a mean smile. It was the smile of a man who had finally balanced the books. No, the terms of the trust are very specific. The principal and interest cannot be touched by any beneficiary until they reach the age of 65. Just like I had to work until I was 65 to build this life, you will do the same. You'll have a very comfortable retirement, I imagine. But for the next 25 years, you won't see a penny. Sarah looked like she was going to faint. But the money we spent on the house, we took out loans, Dad. We're in debt. Then I suggest you work hard to pay them off, I said, setting my napkin on the table. You wanted to increase the value of your inheritance. Well, mission accomplished. It's sitting in a bank, growing at 5%, waiting for you in the year 2049. Think of it as a gift from the father you couldn't be bothered to call. I walked toward the door, stopping only to look back at the beautiful cold kitchen.
Oh, and David? The developer is bulldozing the house on Monday. They only wanted the land for the new medical center. All that marble and the sub-zero fridge, they'll be rubble by Tuesday morning. It's a shame, really. It was a beautiful renovation. I walked out the door and didn't look back. I'm living in a penthouse condo downtown now. It's smaller, easier to clean, and the concierge actually knows my name. I spend my days traveling, places Martha and I always talked about but never went. Last month I was in Tuscany. Next month I'm thinking Japan. My children call me every single Sunday now. They're very polite. They ask about my health with a frantic kind of intensity. They tell me they love me. They send me photos of my grandkids. I know why they're doing it, of course. They're hoping I'll have a change of heart and dissolve the trust. They're hoping I'll pay off the home equity loans they're still drowning in from the investment that got turned into a parking lot. I pick up the phone, I'm pleasant, and I listen to their stories. But I never mention the money, and I never mention the trust. It's funny how that works. All it took was $3 million and a 25-year waiting period to finally become a priority in their lives. I'm enjoying the conversation, but I'm enjoying the silence even more. My life is my own again, and for the first time in a long time, the foundation is solid.